I appreciate the sentiment. What's the solution? How do we stay positive? Where do we go? I also am challenged by how brainwashed a lot of people are in this country and how powerful the media is. So although we will get to the solution, and I of course realize that is what the best approach is, I want to make sure there's no miscommunication and that everyone understands that there is an issue. In the places that I go, it seems that there's a lot of people thinking everything is exactly the way it was. So I'd like to one more time name it and say number one, number two. I'd like to just name every health issue that is affecting children today significantly that wasn't 40 or 50 years. I don't want anyone to miss this. Definitely the goal of this is to come to the end and say, okay, here is the solution, here is the way out of it. But I want to make sure there's no confusion that there is a significant difference. So can we name it? We said autism. Could you name and say number one, number two, so we understand just how many things are different significantly than they were 40, 50 years ago?
Attention deficit, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
No such thing as attention deficit not long ago.
You have, if you want to look in order of how things are impacting, allergies would be the number one in terms of prevalence. Then you get into learning and behavioral disorders. So that's, 1 in 6 kids have some kind of learning and behavioral disorder, and that includes ADHD, which is at 1 in 9 kids, and actually I think it's higher than that. Then you get down into things that are a little bit more challenging, where you have autism is less prevalent, but still so much more prevalent, obviously, than ever before. Inflammatory bowel diseases, things like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease are showing up in children. They used to not diagnose Crohn's before 15. That was really like the earliest you saw, and now it's being diagnosed in toddlers. Obesity and diabetes, we know that that's an epidemic that's hitting not just children, but adults. It's everywhere and everybody, so that's probably the most
But children
prevalent.
more so. 2 out of 3 people now contracting type 2 diabetes are below 16.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of a condition that didn't used to impact children. You didn't see children with type 2 diabetes.
When I was studying, they used to call it adult onset diabetes.
That's right.
And eczema, huge, often goes along with respiratory disorders too, the two often.
One of the things I wanted to mention about all these conditions we're listing here is that when a parent typically goes to see their physician, and this is well-meaning, very well-educated physicians, what the physicians were taught, or there was sort of a mindset or a conceptualization of health that was what they learned when they were in medical school, which is that there's a gene-based reason here, that this is genetic, that that's something called genetic determinism, where what the condition of your health is dependent on your parents, your grandparents. And while there is a component of that's true, absolutely, genetics are of course important, and now we're learning more about epigenetics and how much the environment impacts our genes and how that's transferred down through generations. But you do not have epidemics of genetic disorders. So when a parent gets a diagnosis with their child has autism or their child has allergies, immediately they start thinking, well, that's strange because it's not in my family. And when a parent looks for answers about their child who has Hashimoto's or another autoimmune disorder, the parent will say, I don't understand, it's not in my family. Nobody in my family has Hashimoto's or Graves' disease or any of these other kinds of new diagnoses. So that's one of the things that we need to get rid of, and that's actually one of the ways, talking about solutions, that's one of the ways we get to solution is to break the chains of genetic determinism and start understanding that environment matters, choices matter, lifestyle matter, and that actually is really empowering because you can make choices all day long that are good or bad for your child's health. Your child can learn to make good choices for their health or bad choices for their health, and that is doable. Addressing a genetic issue, that's less you can do. So I feel very optimistic about the fact that once people are aware that these are lifestyle and choices related, there's so much we can do.
Well, one of the most frightening things that we see on an ongoing basis, if we go back and visit when I was a young teen, young ladies at that point contracted menstruation at 15, 16 years old. Today, I don't know how many of the listeners in the room and around the world know that it's common that 9 and 10-year-old young ladies create menstruation. We also had, in my mom's generation, the common age for menopause was 55. It's dropped a decade, it's now 45. And this is in part the same cause for the diseases we're discussing. The heavy metals, the chemicals, the hormones in the foods. And we are actually morphing, mutating, and disturbing the natural biological rhythm of the human body. Young boys with testicle cancer skyrocketing. When you start to see the studies, Harvard Medical School put a study out and said, I report this in my book, Sweet Disease, that when young ladies eat large amounts of sugars in their formative years, 14, 15, 16, that by the time they reach 35 or 40, they contract breast cancer at a 4 to 5 time higher rate. Now that's called epigenetics. And there's, as we just articulated wisely, very few things that are genetic. Almost everything we're discussing here, almost 100% of what we're discussing, were caused by choices. And sadly, with the child, they're not making the choice. The addicted and disturbed parent is making the choice. Years ago, I heard one of my favorite actors, Downey Jr., being interviewed, and it was a very poignant interview. The person who was asking questions really hit it on the head and said, well, you've been an addict from the time you were a young boy. How long ago did you take your first drug? And he said, when I was 5 years old, my father gave it to me. So these are helpless little creatures that we're actually saying it's okay to eat fast foods and take soda and to take sugar and to do these horribly bad things that literally are going to destroy the health and the lives of these people. And by the way, you, as a humanity, is going to be destroyed. If we're as sick as we are today, that it's not economically or morally sustainable, what is it going to be like with these children, with these shockingly outrageous levels of disease? New diseases that didn't even exist, these children are enduring at this point.
So there's electromagnetic field disturbances. Every child has a machine. Since they're 1 year old, they're an expert in playing games, and they're constantly in it. We have Wi-Fi in the house. We have maybe smart meters. We just caught the guy wanting to put a smart meter on our house, and that was the end of that. We told him, you want to talk to our lawyer? Because you have the right of saying no to smart meters. Smart meter goes through your whole house many, many times every minute. And, there's so many things that, and you're talking little bodies that they're bombarded with, and, they have no protection. Dr. Hardell, a Swedish doctor, did a study, because in Sweden and Europe we used cell phones long before America started. So you saw kids about 30 years ago with a cell phone, about 3 years old, going over to some friend and just so parents could call. Well, so we have huge studies about brain cancer and how holding the phone to your ear is tremendously, it's a catastrophe. And so anybody that has children with cell phone, first of all, you should have a EMF protection on it, but make sure that they learn from early age that the only way they can talk on it is on the speakerphone. But it doubled the risk of malignant cancer and brain cancer. And of course it goes after the thyroid, and now we see thyroid problem, it's exploding. And not only is it Chernobyl, Fukushima, it's what we're doing every day and what we are allowing our kids to do too. And we have 4 kids. It was a big part of their life, and you had to limit the time that they could use these machines.
Right here in this conference, Dr. Dever Davis, Dr. Hardell is the world's authority. He's an oncologist. Dr. Dever Davis, an extraordinary scientist, will be speaking here to you about it. And maybe she'll show and share pictures she
She
has
ended
with
up-
us in the past.
She's not going to be speaking, she had to cancel.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I just had a 20-year-old tell me something very disturbing, that in high school, it's considered cool to have a problem. And the problem is having an eating disorder, cutting, have an addiction, and be struggling with your sexual identity as if you're supposed to have decided these things by the time you're 12 years old. And she said they create something, and there's 12-year-olds trying to decide, well, I'm really a boy, I'm really a girl, I want to go on hormones, and then they change their mind, but their parents are letting them go on hormones, and then they change their mind, and they've really messed themselves up. So that's a whole other ballgame that
that's
we
true.
weren't dealing with 20 years ago.
Or have out-of-control parents. These people are obviously mentally disturbed in some ways to allow this to happen, to actually encourage it.
What I would say is that it's our culture.
yeah.
This is what happens to people when they live in this fast-paced, quick, cheap, easy culture. We've created this since post-World War II, this industrial era, where we have all of our goals are the acquisition of stuff and things, and there's always new products coming out, and there's no regulation or testing to see these new products, and that applies to technologies, but that also applies to food and genetically modified organisms and pesticides, herbicides. What are there, 80,000 chemicals out there that have never been tested for their safety that we have in and around us constantly in our personal care products and the things in our home? This is really part of our culture. So to say to a parent, ditch your culture because it's making you sick, that's really hard. That's a hard thing to hear, and how do you do that? But what I will say is if you tell a parent that their child with whatever diagnosis it is, let's say it's autism, that diagnosis, that your child's condition is not genetic, that it's environmentally derived, that's like switching a light switch on for them. Because most parents, because they go to their conventional medical doctor who says, we don't understand this condition, it's probably genetic, there's not much you can do, here's some supportive, kind of palliative things that you can do. That's what parents are getting. We need to just send a totally different message. No, this isn't genetic, this is environmental, and there are things that you can do. And you know what? I love my babies so much as a parent that I will do anything to make them not sick. But if somebody tells me there's nothing you can do, you don't do anything. So what we need to do, our responsibility is to get the word out that you can do something about this, that we need to make different choices. And when we make different choices, it protects our children's health and it protects our health.
We see child after child after child, when the parents have this education and understanding, reverse the diseases we're now talking about. If these were genetic problems, you can't reverse them.